Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. This is the Academy of Worship Podcast. I'm Lauren Levisor.
And I am Chris Davis.
And today we are bringing you a topic on guitar amps. How to pick them out, all the stuff about them, all the information that you might possibly want to know about guitar amps. Now, if you are not a guitar player or you do not use a guitar amp for anything, don't tune out because this is interesting stuff and it may just leak into your side of the stage.
Absolutely.
So,
well, as guitar players, we will leak into your side of the stage.
it's true. We will not be isolated.
Yeah.
All right. So recently, Chris and I decided that we were both in the market for new amps. Yes, I am a bass player, but I try to play as many of the instruments as I possibly can. So I've been getting into playing more electric guitar recently. So I needed an amp. And then Chris's also blew up.
Yeah. It was sad.
Yeah.
My Egnator Tweaker 40 for the second time exploded. I did.
Great amp otherwise.
Yeah. It sounded all right. Just doesn't like to stay alive.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So yeah, I'm going to be asking Chris all kinds of questions because he's been playing guitar a whole lot longer than I have.
I don't know. Maybe
a whole lot longer than you people have been alive, really.
I've been playing guitar more consistently than you have, but I don't know. I mean, you've been playing guitar as much as I have almost.
Yeah, just not focused on it.
Yeah.
Oh man,
you've been playing a bass
when I finally
guitar.
got that bar chord down. Oh, what a day!
Woohoo!
Anyway,
yesterday was a good day.
Oh. So anyway,
let's nerd out.
Yeah, so take us to that point where you got to that. What was going on with your previous amp?
I'll narrow it down because it had a host of issues leading up to this.
Actually, you know what?
Please.
Can we back up even a little further? Can you give us a brief history of the amps that you've had and how you came to decide to maybe get each one, or what prompted you from having one to going, you know what, I want something else?
Well, I'll try to keep it brief. So I started with a full stack 5150.
So you didn't start small then?
No, I didn't start small at all. That had to do with circumstances of having an inheritance and being young and dumb and buying very expensive things. It was a phenomenal...
Wait. Buying a full stack is never dumb if you have the means.
I suppose. But I wasn't, nowadays it wouldn't be a wise decision. Yeah. Okay, so I started there, an awesome amp, and from that, for whatever reason, I still regret this decision ultimately, but I Johnson amplification happened. They lasted a very short amount of time. Google them. Their website's still up, but I think you.
And I have to add, you got into the 5150 right when it was released.
Yeah.
You got into the Johnson right when it was released.
Yeah. I tend to be bleeding edge on some stuff.
Yeah.
And also the 5150 amp, which is hilariously famous now, but when it was released, it was PV. People say, what now?
Yeah.
I was a huge Eddie Van Halen fan. Still am. And so I had to have everything he has because I have Wolfgangs. And yeah. Anyway, I digress. So I got that. The Johnson amplification came out. It was the Millennium
2000.
No, it was like the 120 because 120 watts stereo. It was a beautiful sounding head. I had that Carvin 412 that was split in two sides. That was stereo. I ran stereo. It was crazy. That amp blew up more than one time.
That's true.
It had like a tube preamp, which we'll get into why that's cool, and a solid state back end, power amp, and it was a trippy head. But it was digital and analog at the same time. Like I had a full digital preset board thing, so all the effects and everything was digital. Why I got that amp, I think I was just starstruck with a few of the patches that I sat down at one of their stores. It skips music, I think.
Well, sure, it makes sense. I mean, so I've got hundreds and hundreds of effects and sounds that I can put into presets and have at my feet right away instead of having to pay 10 times that amount for individual. Yeah.
And the quality of the effects on there were second to none comparative to what I had. So I had 5150, which again, I wish I wouldn't have sold, but I had that. But then as an effects unit, I was running the Zoom 4040, I think it was.
Yeah.
Into the effects loop for part of it. It was crazy. I'm looking at it now going, I don't know how I didn't light something on fire because I don't know what I was doing, but I think I used that for delays and modulations and stuff. And It sounded phenomenal. But I think that I just was blown away by the effects and stuff. So anyway, I went that direction. That amp died, the Johnson. And then, gosh, what did I do after that? I think I was just like ampless for a really long time because our band that we at the time broke up or stopped, and I just kind of wasn't doing anything with anything. My next amp after that, if I'm remembering correctly, was a Fender Frontman 212, like the whatever. It was like 100 watts. It was super loud, solid state amp. I remember it was so loud I couldn't turn it down enough. Like I got soft enough on the master volume that it was either off or on, and it was just there was no in between, and I couldn't turn it up anymore because it was just so loud. And I was running, and actually,
there's probably a few people going, yeah. Heard people talk about that one.
Yeah, and then I was running an M13 into the front of it for pretty much everything because that was a purchase. That whole thing was like me getting back into playing live guitar because there was this whole gig that I signed up for and didn't have any gear. So I'm like, hey, sweetie, I got to go to the store and buy like everything that I don't have. I have the guitars. That's all I got. And she was like, all right. So that was kind of my rig for a little while. And then I started kind of updating parts of it. And anyway, and then I went to the Egnator Tweaker 40. There may be some amps in there. I forgot. But because I just didn't like, one, it was wicked loud, the Frontman. And then it was solid state. I kind of wanted something a little warmer. So that was a long rambling list of amps and sort of why I changed. But
okay.
Oh, and now I have the Vox AC15.
Yeah.
Which is a great amp.
All right. So let's. So you had all that time to kind of go from amp to amp to amp. Yeah. How does someone find what it is that they're looking for? How do they even make that decision? How do they come to find the amp for them?
Well, I think you have to know what you're going for. Like, what are you trying to do? Like for myself, I can really only speak for myself. I went from, we had a very specific sound with our band that was very hard rock, whatever you want to call it, metal, to now I need, like, I have a jack of all trades. I need to have an amp that can kind of be clean, but a good bed for a pedal board and things like that. So my needs change. So I guess the first thing you need to do is just maybe even write down on a piece of paper, what am I trying to accomplish? Am I trying to play guitar for worship and only worship, or do I need to play an amp or do I need to get an amp that is good for that and also like a top 40s rock thing? Am I doing a cover band? Like, for instance, our band now, we do classic rock songs, so I needed something that can handle that and not be, bad in one way, shape, or form, one way or another. So I needed just a good, clean, edge of breakup, like, tone that would be a good bed for a pedal board. That was my whole thing. Some people may just be like, I need metal. I need like the most metal amp ever, and there's a couple of choices there. I need a jazz amp. I need something really clean and real warm and whatever. So it just depends on what you're trying to do, I guess, would be the first thing.
All right. And then I guess there's also the big thing that you'd have to look at is price range. Yeah. Like, where is your price range? What are you willing to spend? Yep.
Yeah, because, in all of those categories I just listed and many more, there's amps that go from, like that Frontman to whatever it was called. Whatever it was called, that 100-watt solid state thing was, I think, a $200 amp, like $199. Which is great if that's what you need. If you need just a nice clean amp, you're playing jazz, like, it would probably be really good for something loud jazz, I guess. They have lower wattage versions of the Frontman, but that might be great. But to a metal guy, not really. That's just gonna be, you put a metal pedal in front of that. It's just gonna be like a can of bees when you turn it on. So it just depends on what you're going for. And then if you have a huge chunk of change that you can spend, like, okay, I can spend up to $3,000. Okay, well, now you're talking about a whole different range of amps that can do a lot of things.
Right. Oh, so you're going to be able to pay for hand-wired. Okay.
Right. Well, and once you get up into that price range, you're usually not walking into Guitar Center.
Right.
You can, but this is where you're looking online, talking to amp like boutique guys that make them, probably placing orders like that. So you can dump an endless amount of money in amps, but it depends on your price range. But usually most people are up I've seen some guys that are up to $2,000 and stuff, but that's like a huge purchase. But a lot of guys, they want the kind of good but mid-range amp that's not going to break the bank.
Yeah. We decided to both get amps, and so we took the day and we're like, okay, we're going to hit a couple of different shops.
Yeah.
We're going to play every amp they have.
It's awesome.
And just compare everything. So Chris brought 2 different guitars with him.
Mm-hmm.
And his pedal board. Yep. And I didn't bring anything because I was relying on his expertise and I was just sitting back and listening to everything. And I know that my level of playing isn't up to where I'd be able to bring a couple of guitars and my pedal board and play and go, oh yeah, this, no, not that.
Right.
I have a bit of an ear, but I know not as much as Chris. I know to trust his ideas and his input on things, and so I was definitely coming along and getting his input and having him play through them as I listened.
Right, but I think it's fair to point out though, like I said, you did know what you want. Like you had, prior to going out, you had nailed down, this is what I need it to do.
Right,
and I think that's going back to one of your original points was that's one of the key things you have to do, right. And you also knew kind of a price range. Mm-hmm. So you had. I needed to do this. For instance, you needed it for your studio, and you needed it for other guys to come in low wattage, can't be super loud in your duplex and all this stuff. So It's like, okay, that limits our choices. So yeah. So you had some of it covered already.
Yeah. I definitely had what I wanted it to do, and so I was looking for those things. And then, like you said, you were looking for it to cover both church and the outside classic rock band and all those kind of things. And so, we hit a couple of different stores, one local, just a small shop, and we also went to Guitar Center and ended up coming back to the small shop.
They kicked butt, man.
Yeah, so if you're in Vacaville, check out the Tweed Hut.
Yeah, they rock, man. Tweed Hut in Vacaville's killer. I recommend them highly. I wanted to point out too that like when we set out, it wasn't like I had massive. I mean, the list of amps that I just listed off when you asked me what I'd started with, no guitar player out there is going to listen to that list of amps that I just did and be like, oh, he's experienced with amps, because that's not. Right. I'm not trying to say that at all. I know what I like to hear, and I can definitely get tones out of amps. But so for me, this was also kind of a new experience, because when I had bought amps before, I had just kind of like taken what they I'd plugged into an amp and like, that sounds great, I'll take it. That kind of thing. Which
and you played through Marshalls before, and you've played through a couple different things.
But. That's true. I have played through pretty much everything that a guitar player would need to list on their resume of guitar amps to play through. But owning them, no, I've only owned a few different ones. So, yeah. So,
what would you say the main companies would be then for that kind of amp locker?
Yeah, well, I would say that you'd be hard-pressed not to list the main 3. And this is not to say there aren't like great other amp companies that fit between these. But the 3 names that everyone yells from the mountains is either Fender, which is an American company, Vox, which is a British company, or Marshall, which is a British company as well. So those 3 names, I think, are the one that people jump to first, or like try to, or even compare things to. Like when you hear amps, it sounds like it has the chime of a Vox, or it has. So they usually use them as a litmus test or a comparison. Mm-hmm. Those 3 usually.
All right, so I guess the other category besides kind of those main ones, you'd be getting into the boutique amps that are starting to get popular, or ones outside of that list, and how do they compare? Yeah,
well, there's a couple before the boutique side of things, and I guess it can be argued, but for instance, that Egnator amp I had, it's definitely not a main amp. I guess it could cross over into a main amp name, it's not like people love to look at Egnators all the time. It's a very unique amp in the way that it was set up. It actually could sound like close to all 3 of those because it was a tweaker. It had these different EQ sections you could switch in and stuff. But there's Egnator, which is sort of boutique in that they're not like hand built, but they're not like super mass produced in the way that like some are. Same thing with like say Black Star is another company. I don't know, like Carvin. It has a couple of good amps. Then people go Carvin, but and then you start getting into the really boutique stuff on the high end, which is like Jackson Amp Works, and you get into Divided by 13 and all these bigger boutique amp names. And that the main difference between those and the ones we're talking about on the other end of the scale are really just kind of the hand-wired nature, which I think automatically gets you the boutique quote label. So that means a person physically wired everything on it. There's just a lot more care, I guess, that goes into a lot of more human hands touch all the parts as opposed to running off of an assembly line or using you call them PCBs, those boards that you can just kind of solder things to. They don't do that. It's all direct point-to-point wiring. So it's very old school like stuff. So
yeah, I've heard certain guitarists get into these conversations where it's like, oh, well, I would never buy a Vox between this year and this year because this certain thing happened, and they just were all crap. And then if it was this year, definitely get it, but only if it was hand wired and all that kind of stuff.
If Chris was giving his opinion, which he is, I think some of that is a lot of just kind of snobism and hype. Not to say there aren't legit. Like there was certain things like in the Vox era and Fender and things that like during certain eras maybe there was just really a shoddy workmanship type stuff, and that's legit. You just happen to know. Look, you get one of these amps, it's going to fail in this way almost every single time. Cool, but at the same time, some people are like, well, if it's not like a 64 Vox, then it's not. It's like, okay, slow you down.
Yeah.
Not everyone can afford, Brian May's backline.
Right.
But,
yeah. I actually got the wrong end of that on one of my bass amps. It was SWR Redhead, and
that's right.
Come to find out later when I was trying to get it fixed a little bit because it had a lot of noise. There was a year where Fender bought them out, and it was not a good buyout.
Right.
And the SWR guys just kind of threw all their schematics in a huge box and said, here you go, have fun. And it's just a huge mess for a couple of years until Fender figured out how to make them well.
Yeah.
And it's just a mess inside. It's just solder hanging off of everything.
Yeah. And
it's noisy.
Up until that guy touched it, I think was kind of...
It was pretty bad. He got it better, but it still got some issues. So that happens.
Yep. It does.
All right, so give us a little bit about the difference between solid state and tube.
Well, okay, so I'll talk about the nature more than like what makes them solid. Well, I mean, the quick and dirty of what the difference is solid state is literally that. It's just there's no tubes. It's just it's all I won't say digital necessarily, but it's circuitry that doesn't involve vacuum tubes. We'll just put it that way. And of course, a tube amp does involve vacuum tubes. And there's hybrids. They have some that have like that Johnson was a hybrid. It had like a 12AX7 and like the preamp, and then like the whole power amp was a solid state. So, but the nature of the two can be quite different. Now, I've been shocked by that orange amp that we talked about off air,
right?
that I played. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Shocked me. I didn't expect that to happen. Because it sounded really good. But generally speaking, and this is a very, very broad brush I'm painting with, so forgive me, guitar players. I know this isn't every amp. Solid state amps tend to be a little more, they're so pristine. So one of the bonus to one of these amps is they stay clean at really high volumes. So like that 212 Fender Frontman I had, you could get that thing loud. I mean, like, shaking windows loud, and it would be pristine clean, which by nature most tube amps won't do. I mean, they'll clean, but there's always a hint of some hair. Even if you get them really, really hot, and you dig your guitar and you're gonna start hearing it break up a little bit, which is desirable in a lot of cases. But that's a big difference in the two, or can be a big difference in the two. Solid state amps, in their pristineness, tend to not take pedals as well as a tube amp does. So if you're going to kind of dump a bunch of money into pedals, you may not be super happy with some of the things, particularly drives, like dirt pedals, like overdrives and distortions and stuff. They can be okay on one, but a lot of times they tend to hit the front end of an amp in a way that tubes kind of react to it and don't get fizzy. And a lot of solid state amps can do that, where you stick it in the front and there's nothing for the amp to react to. Or I should say the amp doesn't react in that way. So it just it just shows you your pedal in all of its glory. And sometimes the way they're designed isn't meant to sound that way because it's supposed to interact with the front end of an amp. So you can get a little weird. However, delay pedals and modulation pedals sound gorgeous through a solid state amp if you get them set right and stuff, because that's just, sometimes you want that just gorgeous, pretty glass-like thing. So again, is what you want. But that's the big difference.
All right, so that brings me into my next one, which is effects loops.
Yeah.
So, you're talking about hitting the front end, and you're talking about, modulations and delays and everything, which sometimes are run through an effects loop separate from your drives and everything. So talk a little bit about that. Sure.
So when it comes to we'll start with tube amps, just because I think the stuff I'm going to talk about tends to work better in that situation, just for the sake of this argument anyway, or at least discussion. When you hit the front end of your amp, let's say you have a tube amp, you have it set to what we're going to call edge of breakup, which is like if you play medium to softly, it's very clean and pretty. And if you hit your guitar really, really hard, it breaks up just a little bit. It has that kind of, not grind, but it has that nice breakup. It's warm, but it's still, you can hear it kind of, it's losing, it's a little squishier when you hit it hard. When you have an amp set like that and you hit it with like a boost pedal, which means it literally boosts the volume of your guitar into the front of the amp. That's what a boost does. And you have that thing, a lot of boosts, like they'll go up to like plus 25 dB of gain, like just a ridiculous amount. But you turn that up and you hit the front end of your amp, all of a sudden you've almost added a second channel to your amp, because you hit that boost pedal, the front of your amp goes, holy cow, the signal coming from that guitar just got really loud. And by nature of the beast, the tubes break up and they get more distorted, more overdriven. Whereas if you did that to a solid state amp, it would just, you'd want to stop playing guitar, because it just wouldn't sound, it'd just get louder. It really would get louder. It may even clip in a bad way to where it goes. So generally speaking, in the front of your amp, you want to run drives and things like that. And so in a tube amp case, that's a good thing. So your drives interact with the front end of your amp really nice, usually. And you get these great rock tones. Now with the effects loop actually sits between your preamp, which is your gain stage. So if your amp has a gain knob, or all your EQ, high, low, mid, whatever, maybe a boost button, a couple of things like that usually, but generally it's like gain and EQ. That's your preamp section. And then there's the effects loop, which then would inject whatever you put in it right there. And then it goes into your power amp section, which literally gives you your volume and power of the amp. And so when you stick stuff in, let's say you have your amp on that breakup edge and you dig in real hard and kind of breaks up a bit, you can get away with running delays and things in the front if you want. But if you think about it logically, if you run a delay in the front of your amp and your amp's, say, overdriven, well, you're literally overdriving your delays at that point, because your delays are going into an overdriven signal, and which can be desirable in some cases. Sometimes you want that. But a lot of times guys want the delays to be to delay whatever you're putting in the front of your amp or whatever's coming out of your preamp. And so that's why you use the effects loop. You put it so where that your preamp goes into the delay goes out into your thing. So it's cleaner. A lot of times you hear the delay repeats better, doesn't get as washed out. And so in that case, when you're involving an effects loop where you're, say, putting a delay or reverb, or even some modulation like chorus or flange or phase or whatever, they'll run like a 4-cable method. So in case you ever hear that term 4-cable method, it's basically out of your guitar, that's one cable out of your drives into the front of your amp, that's 2 cables, and then your delays and whatever into this effects send and out of the into the return rather, and then out of the send into the delays again. That's in the whole loop, and that's 4 cables. So that's, a lot of people will do that, but yeah. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
So right near the beginning of that, you were talking about how the boost would hit the amp,
Yeah.
almost like a second channel. So what are the second channels like? What's the use of them? How would you...
So like an amp with a second channel?
The amp I ended up getting didn't have that,
Right.
but yours did. So what's the difference there?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I'll actually say this. My amp doesn't have a second channel. It has a second input. I think that's an important thing to say because I think it's a little difference. For instance, what Lauren was just saying on the AC-15 is that it has a top boost input and a normal input, which on the amp, when you're in either one, you have separate controls. The top boost has some EQ and some other things, whereas the normal literally is just like a volume, preamp volume. And his amp is similar in that it's, I think you just have one input, right, on the AC-10. Yeah. So, and then some amps actually have channel switching. So you can plug into one input.
Right.
And then you hit a foot pedal or you push a button on the amp and it switches to another channel on the amp. Mm-hmm. So that's different, right? So in my case, I couldn't in the middle of a gig hit a switch and go to the top boost if I was in the normal.
Right. I think the orange that we have at the church has the separate channels.
Right.
Whereas the Vox has the separate inputs.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So in my case of the Ignator that I had before, or still have, but it's not making sound right now, is it does channel switch. In its case, it actually has two identical channels for reasons of the amp's own design. But so the difference would be, I guess, like for instance with mine, I just said like I'd be playing a gig and I'm kind of set the amp to a sound I want, and then use say pedals and guitar knobs and things to change the tone. Whereas with a channel switching amp, you're plugged into one input, and say you have a two-channel amp, right? One's clean, one's dirty.
Yeah.
For sake of this, your first channel, it has its own controls. It has gain, and then tone knobs probably, or some kind of EQ, and then maybe a couple of switches you can push or pull. And then a second channel will have a very similar setup where it'll have a gain and it'll have another set of knobs. And the idea would be that you could set one channel to be clean and sound a certain way, and then you could hit a foot switch. It'll hit the second channel, and that'll be dirty, and all of a sudden you have that set a certain way. So there's some amps that are 3-4 channels. It doesn't, it's crazy. But yeah, that's the main difference in kind of some main amps, and I think that's important too, because when I was looking for, or when we were at the stores looking for an amp, I actually wanted an amp that wasn't switching. That was one of my things. 'Cause I didn't want it's kind of funny to say, I didn't want the temptation to want to use the other channel. Is that weird? Like with my Ignator, I always felt bad because I always set it on one channel and left it. I never switched it, right? So I'm like, well, I got to use this channel for something. Like I feel bad, like I'm not taking full advantage of the amp. And so just like, which is dumb, but in my mind, I'm like, it would be great just to have a awesome pedal platform that sounded great on a setting, because that's usually how I play anyway. And then use my pedals for work.
And if you've got a pedal board full of pedals, now you've added a channel switcher to that, or it seems to me like the separate channel amps are kind of designed more for a simpler system. Like you said, you set one to clean, you set one to dirty, and maybe you'll have a couple of pedals, but
it can get pretty complicated. A lot of guys, when they get into the loop switchers, which is for those that don't know, it sits on your pedal board and allows you to essentially have one foot switch per sound. You can set different ones to enable. There's like 8 pedals in it or whatever, and you can set which ones are on and off, which main pedals is turned on, so that you can hit one pedal instead of pedal dancing, and everything turns on and off. With some of those, they have trigger outs and things like this, so that you can channel switch your amp when you hit that. So you can, so in that case, you'd hit it, it would switch to your clean channel, and then your delay and your chorus comes on, or your delay and compressor or whatever, and you have this super pristine clean sound. Like especially guys who want to use their amp for the gain. Like there's a lot of guys that want their amp gain. They don't want to deal with a dirt pedal. Or if they do, they'll stick it in front of the amp and use it as a boost, or use it as some kind of flavor to kick that amp into higher gain or whatever. So like a lot of metal guys do that. They'll actually use like their Mesa Boogie or whatever they're playing through that's pretty grindy, and then they'll put it like a Tube Screamer is super popular in the metal world. They'll kick that into the front of their amp and it'll sound even bigger. So,
wow.
Yeah, it just depends what you're going for.
All right. So we've covered the preamp and the amp sections and all that. How about the speakers? How does that change things?
They don't matter at all. No, I'm kidding.
Moving on.
It's sacrilege to say that. I'll be completely honest. I haven't had the experience up until now. Even now it's not, but more so now than it was, with knowing the amount of difference a speaker can make. I had read in lots of places, and I've heard other guitarists say, if you want to change your sound dramatically, the first place you should start is a speaker. So, for instance, if you don't like your amp, the first thing you should do isn't go look at another amp. It's look at your speaker and see if you can solve it with the speaker. I didn't really understand that until I started playing through lots of different, hearing the difference, like A-Bing them, like when we were out, we knew what specific speakers were in certain amps, and we'd play them and set them very similarly tone-wise.
Yeah, that was really cool. We actually had two Vox AC-15s side by side.
Yeah.
And the only difference was the speakers that were in each one.
Yeah, one had the greenback, and one had the Celestion greenback, and one had the Alnico blue.
Yeah.
Which is funny because the Alnico blue is a more expensive speaker, and a lot of guys I like the greenback better.
Yeah.
So I thought that was pretty funny. But it's also a really hard thing to judge in that not every amp, but a lot of amps, like separate amps, like a Black Star and a AC30 and a, I don't know, pick your amp here, they're all going to have separate speakers in them when you're testing them, right? Mm-hmm. So the real comparison would be in a room that you could like turn on an amp and then switch the speakers as you're playing, right, like without touching the amp. That would be ideal, but no one, of course, has that. That's ridiculous. So I don't know. I don't have the authority to really speak about what different speakers sound like per se, but I can tell you what I like when I hear them if it was a true AB. But I will say, though, that in that one particular case where we had the same amp set the same way, but both of them had different speakers in them, same guitar, that was different. I was like, oh, cool. So there are differences. And it usually comes down to where the boosts are. Like some of them are more mid-range focused. Some of them have a cleaner high end. Some of them have a floppy low end, where some of them are really tight on the low end. There's so much you can.
So how does the size of the speaker come into it?
So that one's a little bit easier. Generally, although again, the AC10 blew my mind and it kind of changed. If you guys haven't heard the Vox AC10, go out and go check it out because it's like a ridiculous amp. So as far as amp or speaker sizes, there's only a few main sizes that most guitar players tend to go towards. You're into the 6 and 8 inch speaker range, is like the practice amp, cheap, lower end type stuff. Although there's some older 60 something Sears ones that have like a 6 inch in them that some people like. But anyway, those tend to be real boxy, small sounding. They really sound that size. They sound tiny. They can't get real bassy at all because they start flopping around and distorting. And but they're great for just you're practicing scales in your room at super low volume. Great. You jump up to 10-inch speaker, which is probably the first size of speaker that a guitar player would legitimately use in some cases. Not all, but some. Like the Fender DeVille, I want to say, has 4 10s in it. I think that's right. Gosh, don't kill me, guys, if I got that wrong. The Vox AC10 has a 10-inch in it, and sounds phenomenal. And I know the DeVille, if I'm getting that right, is also a very, very popular amp with people. So 10-inch doesn't have as much bass response usually as a 12-inch. The bigger you get, obviously, the bigger.
Yeah. The Fender Blues Junior, does that have a 10 or a 12?
Like the 3? That's a 12, I believe.
Yeah.
Because the one that our buddy has is a 12, as far as I know.
Yeah.
So they may come in a 10, but so anyway, they can sound okay, but I've heard lots of amps that may not be the speaker's fault, but they sound real boxy, and that's where you start getting that quote boxy sound is 10. Some guys though have there's pretty famous recordings actually. I think Led Zeppelin and some other people have recorded guitar parts, mic stuck in them, and recorded, and they wanted that sound to kind of work off of maybe a bigger guitar sound. So there's places for them. And then it jumps up to a 12-inch speaker, which seems to be hands down the most popular size of speakers for guitar. And the they're everywhere. Those have, I think that's just a sweet spot. They have a great high end response, and their low end response can be nice and tight but big, and or not boomy and floppy. It depends on what you want speaker wise, but they tend to be a sweet spot. So 12-inch tends to sound more full range and can get louder usually. So, those are the main ones. I think there may be a 15 somewhere you can get, but
tends to get a little floppy, I would think.
Yeah, I don't know. My mind tends to go towards, if you had a 15, you'd be playing jazz or something a little more mellow. Because I don't think the high end response would be all that great, but it would sound really rounded and good and warm. I could be wrong. Feel free, guys. I don't claim to be a authority on speakers at all.
Yeah. Yeah, when we went in, I had the mindset of, I need an amp that I can play at low volumes while still getting that tone that I wanted for my home studio, but also for a training program that I run. I wanted guitarists to be able to come in to basically my converted garage and be able to play at low enough volumes that I wouldn't bother neighbors, but be able to get that sound out of it like it was a larger amp. Yeah. And so I went in after all my research thinking I was going to walk out with a Vox AC4.
Right, which is a 4-watt.
The 4-watt
10-inch speaker.
TV version or whatever it was. Yeah. But it had an attenuator on it, so you could do quarter-watt, half-watt, 1-watt? Or
that was like 4-watt,
4,
half, 1.5 and like quarter or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. And so I thought, great, I can move that around as I need and really drive that amp at lower volumes. Had a
10-inch speaker.
Was it a 10?
It might have been an 8, but yeah.
It was like a 10 or an 8. Yeah,
I think it was
something small, but it just sounded really boxy when we got there.
Yeah.
And even the one right next to it that was very similar that didn't have the attenuator on it, that 4-watt, for some reason, it was just this boxy, kind of bad sounding amp to what we wanted anyway.
Yeah, and there may be a place for it, but I've never heard a boxier amp than an AC4. I was surprised. I was like, wow. I mean, it's like... It was a whole different ballgame.
I could just tell right away. I was like, nope, that's not exactly what I was looking for. Right. And then we went over to the AC10, which had only been out for like 2 weeks at the time, I think. Mm-hmm. And blew us away. So
I can't say enough good
stuff. The difference was that it shouldn't be that much difference.
It was ridiculous.
So check it out.
If I was going to buy another amp, like just to have an amp for stereo rig or something, an AC10 would be on the list. It's so good for the money. Yeah,
and we tried out the Fenders, we tried out the Orange, we tried out what was the Mark?
Vox. The Mark. It's the guys who make Mark-based stuff. It's Mark something. They were pretty all right. They weren't great, but we tried. We basically anything they had to play, we tried.
Yeah, and so going on that, so the low watt, high watt thing.
Yeah, that one's pretty easy. I mean, it can get complicated, I suppose, but most people think high wattage means it's louder, which it is, but not in the way that most people think. Almost always, the wattage has to do with the headroom, meaning how loud you can turn up the gain of an amp without it getting super distorted, so, without getting too complicated. So like a low wattage amp, like the AC4, once you started getting that thing up to any kind of, really any volume, you're going to have some breakup because it just didn't have the headroom. The power amp and just stuff didn't have the headroom to do anything but a little bit dirty to really dirty. And it's not a good dirt. I found the low wattage stuff, the 4-watt stuff, it just sounds floppy, and I don't like that. It's not my thing. Some people like it. More of a fuzz, I guess. When you get into the higher wattage stuff, like the Marshall and really anything that goes up to 100 watts or higher, they have higher ones. They definitely get loud, and they can definitely be overdriven in of themselves. But you tend to have a lot more headroom to play with when you're up loud, so that you're not, a good example would be listen to AC/DC, specifically Malcolm Young. If you can pick his guitar part out or ever hear an isolated track or something, he almost played, it was really, really loud. Like it was Marshall's, turned up really, really loud, but his gain is super low. Like he has one of the lowest gain rock sounds I've ever heard. And it sounds so good. Whereas, Angus was much higher gain. Still not that high, but so it's a good example of like a Marshall turned up really loud, but not super gainy. Whereas, a lower watt.
Which on a side note, I loved when you pointed it out to me years ago, whenever that was, of just like taking those two guitar players in that band at the same time and kind of figuring out what they were both doing. If you're in a band where you play with multiple electric guitarists, use them as an example because, like you said, Malcolm had this low gain tone.
Yeah, really.
And Angus had the high gain tone, and because of that and just the way they played and everything, it melded together into this huge wall of sound that complemented each other.
And speaking of that too, I want to just push this out there for any guitar player who doesn't know. A lot of guitar players know, but more gain, meaning the distortion, does not mean bigger rock guitar sound.
Right.
It actually is the opposite of that. It's actually volume and less gain, and you get monster guitar tones. It's really kind of counterintuitive to a beginner, but
yeah, the older I'm getting and the longer I've been playing, I'm starting to realize that more, because I was like more dirt, more guitar, just crunchy, and no, it actually sounds better if you back that off, and it works in the mix better, and everything else comes through.
And speaking, kind of putting that to practice in the low wattage rather amps. When you don't have that headroom to play with, you actually lose note definition and your chords get mushy and mixed together. Yeah. So while they have a place, especially low volume, because they just can't get super loud, they can get kind of loud, but when you start getting loud, you just don't have an option to keep your guitar clean. You have to deal with it just being kind of a mess all the time. So with the higher wattage stuff, it's nice, or even, let's say, mid-range wattage, in the 40 watt range, 40, 50, you have a decent amount of headroom to where you can kind of clean it up and get that power and the definition behind it without it just going fizzy. So, it's just good stuff to know.
Cool.
I think.
Well, I think we covered a lot today.
We did.
Hopefully we haven't bored everyone. And if you want to hear more stuff like this in the future, just let us know.
Yeah.
Put a comment on there, and we'll try to give you all of the technical expertise we've gained thus far, whatever that is. And
don't I keep saying this over and over, but don't take our word for stuff. I mean, the bottom line for doing any of this stuff for yourself is just go play them. Mm-hmm. Take a guitar, plug it straight into the amp, turn it to a moderate volume to where you know that it's not like so quiet that it's not working the amp, but it's just go listen, use your ears, because there's no better education than your ears.
Right.
Turn knobs, see what stuff does. You can go on YouTube or read forums all day long, but it's until you sit down in front with your guitar in front of an amp, And that's the other thing we didn't really cover was you brought two guitars with you. You brought one with humbuckers and one with single coils. Yeah. So. Yeah, I wanted to see how it reacted to different guitar types because you got, most single coils are lower output and they're trimmier and cleaner. And then I brought my Wolfgang, which is way higher output pickups, and just to see how it went. So, yeah, get your hands on it, listen to it. Yeah, do it. And a lot of guitar players or music shops, I should say, really don't care if you want to go in and try them out, because if your intention is to hopefully eventually buy or at least educate yourself, they'll let you play them. Just go in. Yeah, you might not want to stumble through Sweet Child of Mine for 4 hours, but Enter Sandman. If you're legitimately trying to test out an amp and your intention is to figure out which one you want, they'll let you. Oh yeah, for sure. Are we good? Did I answer your questions? Yeah, all of them. All of them? Mm-hmm. All right. Are you an amp expert now? Can you show me some things? On good days. Good days. I think it might be important to note too, Lauren and I have the intention, and that's the important part, because we may never do it, but we have the intention of actually starting, or at least using this as one of the ideas to our YouTube channel, which started this entire thing. It's youtube.com/Academy of Worship. And right now there's older videos on there. They're still, I guess, educational. It's just me yakking. But we would like to do an actual demo of some of the stuff we talked about today, and like show you what we're talking about as far as differences and all this stuff. So keep an eye out. That may happen sooner rather than later. We have some plans, but Yeah, so we want to encourage people to start looking at the YouTube channel because we really want to start putting content there. So check it out.
Yep.
You may hate it.
All right, you want to hit us up with the links?
Yeah, so the YouTube one I just gave you, which is, again, youtube.com/Academy of Worship. We have the Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Academy of Worship Online. You can find us, of course, on iTunes and stuff. Just search for Academy of Worship where we show up. But if you're looking for a direct link to our where we host all of our podcasts, you can check out academyofworship.podomatic.com, and that'll get you to our hosted page. But yeah, we're all over. Just look for any RSS reader on your phone or podcasting app on your phone. Just punch us in and it'll find us.
All right. Well, thanks for listening to us. This has been the Academy of Worship podcast. I'm Lauren Levasseur.
I'm Chris Davis.
Thanks for listening.